Tonight, Julia Glass is going to run the evening, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. Julia is the author of the novels And the Dark Sacred Night, The Widower's Tale, The Whole World Over, and the National Book Award-winning 3 Junes, as well as the Kindle single Chairs in the Rafters. Her third book, I See You Everywhere, a collection of linked stories, won the 2009 SUNY John Gardner Fiction Award. She has also won fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York Foundation for the Arts, and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. Other awards for her fiction include the Sense of Place Award, the Tobias Wolff Award, and the Pirates Alley Medal for Best Novella. Her essays have been widely anthologized, most recently in Bound to Last, 30 Writers on Their Most Cherished Book, edited by Sean Manning, and in Labor Day, True Birth Stories by Today's Best Women Writers, edited by Eleanor Henderson and Anna Solomon. Also a teacher of creative writing workshops at programs ranging from the Fine Arts Work Center right here in Provincetown to the MFA program at Brooklyn College. Julia lives with her 2 sons and their father on the North Shore of Massachusetts. She's also a wonderful friend of mine. Please give a round of applause for Julia.
Thank you. I want to second Josh's welcome to the barn. I've been involved since the beginning with Josh, who I thought was a complete fool to undertake this, but he accomplished it, and I'm very proud to be a part of it. First, I want to thank a few people who have helped us launch the literary programs here in particular. The first one is Matt Clark at the Provincetown Library, who has helped us publicize tonight's event, and also the events tomorrow. Tomorrow, 9 writers will read and be in conversation from 10 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And there will also be a tribute to the poet Stanley Kunitz. If you want to see details about the timing of those events, go to our website, and please come if you can. So that is the lineup for this weekend. I also want to thank Nan Sinater of the Provincetown Bookshop, who is now our official bookseller and who will be selling books of ours after this event tonight. We'd be happy to sign books for you. She'll also be selling books for tomorrow's events as well. So I just want to let you know the format we're going to be using this evening. I am so happy to be hosting Edward Kelsey Moore and Andre Dubus III. And Edward will read first and talk about his wonderful novel. And after that, I will get up and read and talk. And after that, Andre. And after that, the 3 of us are going to come together on stage and answer all your questions. And I hope you'll come up with some good questions for us. So let me introduce Ed. Edward Kelsey Moore is the author of the New York Times best-selling novel, The Supremes at Earl's All You Can Eat, which was awarded the 2014 First Novelist Award by the Black Caucus of the American Library Association and was chosen as a 2013 Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers selection. It was also named a 2014 Illinois Reads book by the Illinois Reading Council. Moore's essays and short fiction have appeared in the New York Times and a number of literary magazines, including Ninth Letter, Indiana Review, African American Review, and Inkwell. His short fiction has been featured on Chicago Public Radio's Stories on Stage series. In addition to his writing, Edward maintains a career as a professional cellist, performing with a number of ensembles, including the Chicago Sinfonietta and the Joffrey Ballet Orchestra. A native of Indianapolis, Edward lives in Chicago with his partner of many years. He is currently at work on his second novel. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Julie Glass and Joshua Prager. It's a real thrill to be here at the relaunching of 20 Summers. And thanks so much for inviting me. The Supremes at Earl's All You Can Eat is the story of a year in the lives of three women, Odette, Barbara Jean, and Clarice. They live in the fictional small town of Plainview, Indiana, and they've been inseparable friends since the 1960s when they were given the nickname Supremes as teenagers. The novel begins when Odette Henry awakens early one morning with a hot flash. And she leaves her husband James in bed and tiptoes out to her kitchen for a glass of cold water and a snack. This part of the novel that I'm going to read a few little spots from it, but they're told from Odette's point of view, and they begin at Odette's kitchen table just after her mother has dropped in for an early morning surprise visit. Mama wore her best dress that Sunday morning, the one she usually brought out only for summer weddings and Easter. It was light blue, with delicate yellow flowers and green vines embroidered around the collar and the cuffs of the short sleeves. Her hair was pulled up, the way she wore it for special occasions. She sat down across from me at the table and smiled. Mama gestured with her hand toward the bowl of grapes on the table and said, "Are you out of ice cream, Odette?" "I'm trying to eat healthier, maybe take off a few pounds this summer," I lied, not wanting to admit that I was thinking of the grapes as a first course. Mama said, "Dieting's a waste of energy. Nothing wrong with having a few extra pounds on you, and you really shouldn't drink so much water at this time of day. You were a bedwetter." I smiled and, in a childish show of independence, drank more water. Then I tried to change the subject. "What brings you by, Mama?" "I just thought I'd come tell you about the fun I had with Earl and Thelma McIntyre. We was up all night going over old times and just laughing up a storm. I had forgot how funny Thelma was. Lord, that was a good time. And that Thelma can roll a joint like nobody's business. Tight little sticks with just enough slack in the roach. I told her—" "Mama, please," I interrupted. I looked over my shoulder the way I always did when she started talking about that stuff. My mother had been a dedicated marijuana smoker all of her adult life. She said it was for her glaucoma. And if you reminded her that she had never had glaucoma, she would bend your ear about the virtues of her preventative vision care regimen. Other than being against the law, the problem with Mama's habit, and the reason I automatically glanced over my shoulder when she started talking about that mess, was that James had worked for the Indiana State Police for 35 years. Mama got caught 20 years back buying a bag of dope on the State University campus on the north end of town. As a favor to James, the head of campus security brought her home instead of arresting her. The campus security chief swore he'd keep it under wraps, but things like that never stay quiet in a little town like Plainview. Everybody knew about it by the next morning. It tickled Mama to no end when her getting busted became a sermon topic at church the next week. But James didn't see the humor in it when it happened, and he never would. I was eager for Mama to get back on track with the story of her evening with the McIntyres, skipping any illegal parts, because foremost among my mother's many peculiarities was the fact that for many years, the vast majority of her conversations had been with dead people. Thelma McIntyre, the excellent joint roller, had been dead for 20-some years. Big Earl, on the other hand, had been just fine one day earlier when I'd seen him at his restaurant, Earl's All You Can Eat Buffet. If he had indeed been visiting with Mama, it was not good news for Big Earl. Mama watched me eat a few more grapes and then said, "Earl said the nicest things about you. He was always so crazy about you. And I don't need to tell you how much he loved James." James loved Big Earl, too. Earl McIntyre was the closest thing to a father James ever had. James's daddy was a low-down, dirty son of a bitch who ran out on him and his mother when James was barely more than a toddler. James's father stuck around just long enough to leave a few nasty scars and then hightailed it out of town a few steps ahead of the law to inflict more damage somewhere else. The visible scar on James was a half-moon-shaped, raised, leathery line along his jaw, made by a razor slash intended for James's mother. The deeper, invisible scars he left on James, only I saw, only me and Big Earl. "So, Big Earl's dead, is he?" I asked. "I imagine so," she said. I sat there for a while, not saying anything, just thinking about Big Earl gone from this earth. Mama gazed at me like she was reading my mind and said, "It's all right, baby. He couldn't be happier." We found out about Mama seeing ghosts at a Thanksgiving supper back in the 1970s. In keeping with tradition, I had done all the cooking. Flowers, Mama understood. She had the best garden in town, even before she devoted a plot to her prize marijuana plants. Food, Mama never quite got the hang of. The last time Mama attempted to cook a holiday meal, we ended up feeding her black and gray glazed ham to the dog and dining on hard-boiled eggs. The dog took one bite of Mama's ham and howled for 6 hours straight. The poor animal never quite recovered. So I became the family chef at age 10, and we ended up with the only vegetarian dog in southern Indiana. That Thanksgiving supper started off real nice. I had cooked my best feast ever, and everybody loved it. We joked and ate and celebrated. Everyone was having a great time, except for Mama, who was testy and distracted all afternoon. She got more agitated as the meal went on, mumbling to herself and snapping at anyone who asked her what was wrong. Finally, she stood up from the table and hurled the butter dish at an empty corner of the dining room. She shouted, "God damn it to hell." My mother can cuss a blue streak when the inspiration hits her. "God damn it to hell, I have had just about all I can take from you, Eleanor Roosevelt. Nobody invited you here, and it's time for you to go." She shook an accusatory index finger at the corner of the room where the stick of butter, avocado green plastic butter dish still adhered to it, slid down the wall, leaving a shiny trail like the path of a rectangular snail. Mama looked at the astonished faces around the table and said, "Don't give me that look. She may have been the perfect little lady when she was in the White House, all lace doilies and finger bowls, but since she died, she ain't done nothing but show up around here drunk as a skunk trying to start some shit." Later, Jackie Onassis came too, but she was much better behaved. Mama asked, "So why are you up drinking all this water at this hour?" "I woke up hot and needed to cool down," I said, taking another swig. "Hot flash." "Hot flash? I thought you were done with the change." "I thought so too, but I guess I'm still changing." "Well, you might want to get that checked out. You don't want to change too much. Your Aunt Marjorie started changing and kept it up till she changed into a man." "Oh, she did not, and you know it." "Okay. Maybe she didn't switch all the way over to a man, but Marjorie grew a mustache, shaved her head, and took to wearing overalls to church. I'm not saying the look didn't suit her. I'm just saying you can draw a straight line between her first hot flash and that bar fight she died in." I ate a grape and said, "Point taken." We sat in silence, me thinking about Big Earl in spite of telling myself I wouldn't, and Mama thinking about God knows what. She stood up and walked to the window that looked out onto the side yard. She said, "It's going to be a truly beautiful Sunday morning. I love it hot. You should get some rest before you go to church." She turned away from the window and said, talking to me like she used to when I was a kid, "Going to bed now. Get." I obeyed. I put my glass in the sink and replaced the half-empty bowl of grapes and the water pitcher in the fridge. And I headed back toward my bedroom. I turned around and said, "Say hi to Daddy for me." But Mama had already slipped out the back door. Through the window, I saw her slowly making her way through my sorry excuse for a garden. She stopped and shook her head with disapproval at the stunted stalks, insect-chewed vegetables, and pale blooms that made up my pitiful little plots. I knew what I would hear about on her next visit. Back in the bedroom, I climbed into the bed and squeezed in close to my husband. I propped myself up on one elbow, leaned over James, and kissed the rough scar on his jaw. He grunted but didn't wake up. I lay back down and pressed myself against his back. Then I reached around and brought my hand to rest on James's stomach. Squeezed against my man in the center of our king-size bed, I fell asleep listening to the rhythm of his breathing. Throughout the year that followed, I thought about that Sunday morning and how Mama's visit had cooled me and cheered me. Even during the worst of the troubles that came later, I smiled whenever I recalled that visit and how sweet it had been for her to come by, looking all done up in that cute sky blue dress that I hadn't seen in the 6 years since we buried her in it. I was born in a sycamore tree. That was 55 years ago, and it made me a little bit of a local celebrity. My celebrity status was brief, though. 2 baby girls, later my best friends, came along within months of me in ways that made my sycamore tree entrance seem less astonishing. I only mention the tree because I have been told all of my life that it explains how I ended up the way I am. Brave and strong, according to those who like me, mannish and pig-headed to those who don't. Also, it probably explains why, after the initial jolt passed, I wasn't much troubled when my dead mother showed up for a chat. I started out life in that sycamore tree because my mother went to see a witch. Mama was smart and tough. She worked hard every day of her life, right up until she dropped dead from a stroke while she was winding up to throw a rock at a squirrel that was digging up bulbs in her garden. All of Mama's toughness had evaporated, though, when she found herself halfway through the 10th month of her pregnancy, wondering if it would ever end. 7 years earlier, Rudy had been born right on schedule. But 3 lost babies followed my brother, none of them managing to remain inside my mother's womb for longer than a few months. Now I had come along and refused to leave. Before she went to see the witch, Mama tried all kinds of things her country relatives told her to do to get the baby to come. My grandmother advised her to eat hot peppers with every meal, claiming the heat would drive the baby out. Mama did it for 3 days and ended up with indigestion so severe that she was fooled twice into thinking she was in labor. 2 times she and Daddy went to the colored hospital in Evansville, and both times she came home with no baby. My mother's sister whispered to her that the only way to get the baby out was to have sex. Aunt Marjorie said, "That's how it got there, Dora. That's the only sure way to get it out." Mama liked the sex idea, if only just to pass the time while waiting, but Daddy was less than enthusiastic. She was twice his weight even before her pregnancy, and when she straddled him in his sleep one night demanding satisfaction, the terrified look in his eyes as she hovered over him made her back down from the sex solution and look to sorcery instead. Like I said, that was 1950, and back then a fair number of people in Plainview, black and white, consulted a witch from time to time. Some still do, but nowadays it's only the poorest and most superstitious of folks, mostly the ones who live in the little Appalachian clusters outside of town who admit to it. Mama went to the witch expecting a potion or a poultice. Poultices were big among witches. But what she got instead were instructions. The witch told her that if she climbed up into the branches of a sycamore tree at straight up noon and sang her favorite hymn, the baby would come. Witches were like that. They almost always mixed in a touch of something approved by the Baptist church. So people could go to see a witch without having to worry that they'd pay for it down the line with their immortal souls. So they did a prayer, a spiritual, or a chant warning about the godlessness of Lutherans. It absolved the client's guilt and kept the preachers off the witches' backs. So on a windy afternoon, my mother hauled a rickety old ladder out to a sycamore tree behind the house. Mama propped her ladder against the tree and climbed up. Then she nestled herself in the crook of 2 branches as comfortably as was possible considering her condition and began to sing. Mama used to joke that if she had chosen something more sedate, something along the lines of Mary Don't You Weep or Calvary, she might not have given birth to such a peculiar daughter. But she dug her teeth into Jesus is a Rock and swayed and kicked her feet with that good gospel spirit until she knocked over the ladder and couldn't get back down. I was born at 1 o'clock, and spent the rest of the afternoon in that sycamore tree until my father rescued us when he got home from his shop at 6. They named me Odette Breeze Jackson in honor of my being born in the open air. As it often happened when a child was born under unusual circumstances, old folks who claimed that they'd been schooled in the wisdom of the ancestors felt called upon to use the occasion to issue dire warnings. My grandma led the chorus in forecasting a dreary future for me. The way she explained it, if a baby was born off the ground, that child was born without its first natural fear, the fear of falling. That set off a horrible chain reaction, resulting in the child's being cursed with a life of fearlessness. She said a fearless boy had some hope of growing up to be a hero, but a fearless girl would more than likely be a reckless fool. My mother also accepted this as fact, although she leaned more toward the notion that I might become a hero. It should be remembered, of course, that Mama was a grown woman who thought climbing a tree in the 10th month of her pregnancy was a good idea. Nearly everyone, it seemed to me, believed that coming into the world in any manner that could be seen as out of the ordinary was a bad omen. People never said, "Congratulations on managing to deliver a healthy baby while you were stuck in that rowboat in the middle of the lake." They just shook their heads and whispered to each other that the child would surely drown one day. Nobody ever said, "Aren't you a brave little thing, having your baby all alone in a chicken coop?" They just said that the child would turn out to have bird shit for brains, and then they went on to treat the kid that way, even if he was clearly a tiny genius. Like the doomed child born on the water and the dummy arriving among fowl, I was born in a sycamore tree and would never have the good sense to know when to run scared. Thank you.
When I invited Ed to be a part of this, I forgot what a hard act he is to follow. One thing I meant to tell you at the beginning is that this platform that we are reading on, we have been told dates back to the origins of this barn as an art school. It was founded in 1907 by Charles Hawthorne. And so last week when I was on this platform, I thought to myself, gosh, an awful lot of naked people have been on this platform. I don't think anyone's going to be naked here tonight, but you never know what will happen in the future at 20 Summers events. So I am going to read from and talk a little bit about my new novel, And the Dark Sacred Night. All my stories begin with a single character who comes to me either gradually or suddenly in a particular predicament. And out of that character, other characters grow. And as the relationships grow, the story appears to me, and I follow that story. I'm not a writer of outlines or even a keeper of notes, and I write a book from the beginning to the end. But something different happened in the genesis of this book. Some of you may know my first novel, 3 Junes, in which Fenno MacLeod, who is a bookseller in the West Village, is the main character, and he comes to have a difficult but very tender relationship with a music critic named Malachi Burns, who's dying of AIDS, through having to take care of Malachi Burns' parrot. And in that book, those two characters came to me, I don't want to say naturally, but I was able to sink into their lives in a way that was a marvel to me. But a character I had a very hard time creating was Malachi Burns' mother, the mother of the dying music critic. And I wanted her to be a very loving mother, but I also knew there was a great deal of friction between her and Mal because of her devout Catholic faith. And I finally understood how to create this character when I was stuck in a traffic jam with my mate somewhere in Connecticut. And whenever we are stuck in traffic jams, it's very important not to talk, because what happens is you get into an argument about whose fault it is that you're in the traffic jam in the first place. And there was one of these big black town cars in front of us for about 20 minutes as we inched along. You know, in New York, these were called pimp mobiles. And it had one bumper sticker on it. And the bumper sticker said, "Life, what a beautiful choice." And I was very touched by that bumper sticker as we rode along behind it, and I got sort of teary. And then I realized after about 10 minutes that it was actually a pro-life sticker. Now, I'm a good knee-jerk liberal, and I'm also a sincere, thinking, sometimes agonized pro-choice person. And once I realized that, I thought, oh my goodness. And what came to me was that this woman would be a very devout Catholic who, rather than protesting against things, is a supporter of young women who learn, who have their babies and raise them, and that she would be someone who worked in a home where very young single mothers are nurtured and schooled and taking care of their babies and given skills to go out into the world. And her name was Lucinda Burns. And I fell in love with this character who'd been so hard to create. And yet she could only take up so much oxygen in that novel. So I kept thinking about her over the years. And I'm not a writer of sequels, but I thought a couple of years ago, you know, I wonder if there's a way that I could address this character again, that I could even write from her point of view. But I didn't feel that I could make her the prime protagonist in a novel. So I went back and I reread the core of 3 Junes. And I re-encountered a secret that emerges in that novel. When the critic, when her son Malachi does finally die, and Fenno MacLeod, the protagonist of that book, comes to find him, knows he'll find him dead, he notices underneath the bed a box, and in that box is a cache of photographs and letters pertaining to a boy, a mysterious boy, who you realize is a secret child that Malachi had. And I thought, what if I took that boy as a grown man and I wrote a novel about him? And that's what I did. So the main character, although there are many points of view and many characters in this book, and it is not, strictly speaking, a sequel to 3 Junes. In some ways, it's kind of a prequel to 3 Junes. When you meet Kit Noonan, that grown boy, he's a 42-year-old man who for 2 years has been out of work. He's an art historian who was denied tenure. He has a wife named Sandra who is a landscape designer, and they have 9-year-old twins. And he's in this very paralyzed, stuck place, and his wife wonders if one of the things he needs to do is go out and find the identity of his biological father, because he has never known it. His mother, who gave birth to him when she was in her late teens and raised him on her own, has never wanted to tell him that secret. She's kept it to herself for complicated reasons that emerge in this book. And so I'm going to read from the very beginning of the book. Throughout the book, you're given snapshots of a summer in the 1960s at a very elite music camp in Vermont. And I'm going to read the opening snippet of that, which begins the book, and then I'm going to read a slightly later scene that's told from Kit's point of view. She saw him through the trees, and she almost turned around. In just 8 days, she had come to believe that this wedge of shore, tumbled rock enclosed by thorny juniper and stunted saplings, but lit by the tilting sun at the western side of the lake, was her secret. Each afternoon, it became her refuge, just one brief measure a piacere of solitude, from another attenuated day of rehearse, practice, and practice even more, of master classes and pauper études, hour after hour of Saint-Saëns and Debussy, of walking over plush lawns, passing adults who spoke zealously, even angrily, in German and Russian, of waking and going to sleep in a room shared with 3 other girls. Not that this life wasn't precisely, incandescently, what she had craved, dreamed about, most of all worked for. How funny that all this discipline and deprivation rewarded Daphne with the headiest freedom she had ever known. Freedom, to begin with, from her mother's vigilance and her brother's condescension, from another summer mixing paints and copying keys in her father's hardware store. During afternoon rest, some campers retreated to their rooms to write letters or take naps. When the rooms were too hot to stand, they spread beach towels under the estate's monumental trees or on the sliver of sandy beach. Others loitered at Le Manoir, though nobody called it that. They called it HQ. There was a games lounge with a moth-eaten billiards table. You could play Monopoly, backgammon, chess. They took turns using the payphones on the porch. But Daphne came here, sometimes just to sit, sometimes read, more often to gaze at the water and let herself wonder at, well, at the here-ness of here, to reassure herself that it was real, to be alone. Except that today she wasn't. Malachi, first flute, sat on her favorite rock facing the lake. She recognized him right away because just that day, standing behind him in the lunch line, she happened to notice the distinctive swallowtail of his tame brown hair as it forked to either side of his narrow neck. His close haircut seemed almost affected. Most of the boys had mussed-up manes, Paul McCartney hair. His posture, typical of flautists, was upright, attentive. He wore his T-shirts tucked into the belted waist of loose khaki shorts. And like his hair, his shirts were defiantly square. No slogans, tie-dyed sunbursts, silhouettes of shaggy rock stars, or sly allusions to other music camps. That day, his T-shirt was orange. "What? Not practicing?" she said. He did not jump, nor did he stand. Waiting till she stood beside him, he looked up and said, "If it isn't the swan herself, come to test the waters." Daphne's swimsuit was a navy blue one-piece chosen by her mother. She wore shorts as well, book and towel clasped against her chest, yet she blushed. "You don't suppose," he said, "that Generalissima has spies in these woods? I've heard there's a flogging room in the cellar of HQ. Daphne laughed. "Not kidding," he said. "Yes, you are." Malachi's prim expression broke. "Pretty martial around here, don't you think? And can you believe all the Iron Curtain accents? What did you expect? The cast of Captain Kangaroo?" This made him laugh. "Maybe Hogan's Heroes? You mean we should dig a tunnel and escape? We could steal those little mallets Dorian uses to play his glockenspiel." Malachi had swiveled to face her. He sat cross-legged, his calves pale and sparsely freckled, his bare feet long and bony. He shaded his eyes. "Sit, or I'll go blind. And then I won't be able to see my music, and my brilliant symphonic career will flash before my irradiated eyeballs." She unrolled her towel and sat facing him. He had no book or other obvious diversion. Was he there to meet someone? What a perfect place for a private meeting. "So are you aware," said Malachi, "that Rhonda would pay me a nice reward to drown you here and now?" Daphne laughed nervously. She and Malachi played together in Chamber 1. Rhonda was her counterpart, a cellist in Chamber 2. Openly and cheerfully competitive, she'd announced at their first dinner that anyone assigned the swan solo in the Saint-Saëns was clearly the director's pet. Daphne might say the same of Malachi, chosen to play Volière. "I just got lucky," said Daphne. "No false modesty allowed," said Malachi. "They decided our parts based on our auditions. Nothing here happens by accident. You know that." "I guess." She didn't like talking about the ranking they all deplored, yet knew had to be a part of their lives forever if they wanted to succeed. "So, are you from one of those musical families where everybody plays something different?" He smirked. Like the Jackson 5? There's a picture to savor. No, I'm it. The one who got whatever genetic mutation makes our subspecies behave the way we do. My brother and sister see me as the weirdo, the family fruitcake, which is a huge relief to them. They get to be the normal ones. So maybe I've got it too, said Daphne. The mutation. Mom plays piano, but Christmas carols, hymns. She subs for the church organist. Actually, I'm not sure how I got into this place. Give it up, Swan. They've got their eye on you here. I saw our task mistress smile yesterday in the middle of your solo for about 1/10 of a second. I didn't think she had those muscles in her cheeks. Natalia Skovoroda, the conductor of Chamber 1, was Ukrainian with a dense, porridge-like accent. Her face, a prime object morning after morning of Daphne's most devoted concentration, was as round and pale as a dinner plate, mesmerizingly smooth for someone who scowled so much. Beneath that scowl, Daphne and her fellow musicians had grown close to one another quickly, like a band of miscellaneous hostages. Malachi leaned toward Daphne. You have that cello stripped naked. Is that a compliment? Because he sat almost directly behind her during morning rehearsal, she hardly ever saw his face. It was long and serious, his eyes a frosty blue that made him look all-seeing, older in a way that was spooky but cool. Across his nose, narrow like the rest of him, a scant dash of freckles stood out sharply, distinct as granules of pepper. A speedboat careened raucously past, skimming the water, passengers shrieking as it bounced up and down. For a moment, they let it capture their attention. Daphne started to stand up. I should go wait for a phone. Haven't called home in a couple of days. No, he said. You should stay and listen to one of my limericks. Limericks? I'm working on a suite of limericks about our wardens. Daphne shifted on her towel. Well, sure. Malachi cleared his throat and sat up even straighter. He cocked his head at a dramatic angle toward the lake, as if posing for a portrait. A Soviet chick named Natalia said, if you play flat, I will flail ya. But come to my room, where I'll bear my bazoom. Maybe let you pick at Holy Grail ya. Blood rushed to Daphne's face. She felt both thrilled and appalled. He turned to her, widened his eyes. Svan, may we have your critique? She covered her mouth, trying to repress the spasms of laughter. Oh my gosh, that is so obscene. Uh-oh, I've shocked you. See, I told you I'm a weirdo. Oh my God. Here, I'll give you something just a bit tamer. Appetizer to next week's celebrity recital. Again, he struck his pose. There once was a diva named Esme, with a lengthy and worldly resume. Listed way at the end was her tendency to bend quite far over and trill, yes, you may. You are horrid, Daphne cried, but she couldn't stop laughing. Okay, can I ask one of you gentlemen to bring my bottle of water? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Andre. You're welcome. Okay. So shifting gears and time frames a little, I'm taking you forward a few decades to the present of the novel, and a scene from Kit Noonan's daily life in suburban New Jersey, where without a job, he's essentially Mr. Mom. He loves his children very much, but it gets a little wearisome. So this is a scene the day after Halloween. Is that right? Yes. Okay. All right. A month ago, at the open house in the twins' school, he overheard two mothers discussing a fantasy website called Second Life, where people create alternate existences just for fun, with dream jobs, dream spouses, dream houses or apartments furnished with a giddy selfishness, their spacious closets filled with clothing in dream sizes, sleek equipment for dream sports. In such a place, however virtual, Kit could write his dream book and teach his dream students, all tall, big-chested women who do not giggle or speak in a language as sparse as Morse code, or pierce their tongues, or text every minute they're not required to make eye contact with grown-ups. He could report to a dream department chair, drive his dream car, maybe one of those snotty little Coopers, why the hell not? Drink his dream beer in his dream bar, no giant screens showing Eli Manning at twice his already massive size. Would Kit be allowed to keep his own actual children? Or could he do better than Fanny and Will? According to those mothers at the open house, the father of one of their children's classmates had left his wife for a woman he met online in that other orchestrated life. Later, Kit wondered if maybe that man's first life, the one he actually lived, had begun to feel adulterous. Kit knows what it's like in a different way for life to turn itself inside out. Downstairs, he finds that Sandra has driven off again. He could call her on her cell phone and ask where, but he won't. He makes himself a peanut butter and honey sandwich. He drinks a glass of low-fat chocolate soy milk. The children return before their mother, entering the house cranky and hungry. Fanny is accusing Will of having stolen the almond joys from her trick-or-treat bag. She checked that morning. She knows there were 2. I stole them, says Kit, and promise to replace them. He's happy to be the brunt of a rage stirred by something as minor as a candy theft. Dad, you're just covering for him. Will is the one, I know it. Innocent before proven guilty, says Will, unless you're from someplace like China. Kit tells them that it's time for a snack. He takes the last apple from the fruit bowl and goes to the fridge for the peanut butter. So tell him what you are guilty for. Show him the paper, he hears Fanny say to her brother, sounding like a child whom Kit would gladly exchange for another, given that second life. Will calls his sister an asshole. Kit scolds him for using such a word, which he's sure his son heard, uncensored by any adult, on the football field. Tell him, says Fanny. You have to, you know. When Kit delivers their plates to the table, Will hands him a note from his teacher. For the 3rd time in 2 weeks, he has failed to turn in his math homework on time. Also, his subject binder is unacceptably messy. Would a parent please email or call to arrange a meeting so they can coordinate a strategy to improve Will's organizational skills? Before Kit can respond, Fanny flourishes a note of her own. This one informs him that she's been cast as a sugar plum fairy in the school's Nutcracker Ballet. Would a parent please sign the permission slip committing her to after-school rehearsals for the next 6 weeks? Kit has no choice but to congratulate her, though it feels as if he's rewarding her for hitting her brother over the head. When, as quietly as he can manage, he tells Will that he and Will's mother will discuss consequences for his chronic failure to remember his homework, the boy breaks into wretched sobs and declares himself the dummy of the family, the stupidest one of all. When Kit reaches to comfort him, Will runs upstairs and slams his bedroom door. He'll get over it, Fanny says in a smug, pretend adult voice. You need to be more sympathetic, says Kit. Your brother has a harder time with schoolwork than you do. It doesn't mean he's less smart. Boys usually do. That's just the way it is, said Fanny. Kit wants to be appalled by her attitude, but he knows she's aping something she heard from an adult, maybe even Sandra or himself, when they thought they were out of earshot. What, he sometimes wonders, if one child grows up to be a success and the other falls by the wayside? He once had stepbrothers with whom he's lost touch. And he has a half-sister who's little more than half his age, but he's always been, at heart, an only child. Learning that he would have 2 children at once was thrilling news. They'd been through so much to get Sandra pregnant, yet it filled him with panic to think of all the extra things he would have to learn along with becoming a father, things familiar to people who had real, lifelong siblings. Sandra walks in the door and stops. She can hear her son wailing from his room. "What's going on? You're both just standing here? Why are you letting him cry like that?" Fanny, still eating her snack, says, "He's sad because he's in trouble." As she licks her fingers, Kit realizes that he did not ask the children to wash their hands, which reminds him of the bathroom sink. He realizes that he never flushed their bathroom drain with water after filling it with whatever toxic potion eats through ossified toothpaste. He imagines a hole corroded in the pipe, which in turn recalls the leak he discovered in the roof earlier that day. He says to Sandra, "There's just a lot going on right now." Thank you. Thank you. So I now have the pleasure of introducing Andre Dubus III. He is the author of 6 books, including the New York Times bestsellers House of Sand and Fog, The Garden of Last Days, and his memoir, Townie. His most recent book, Dirty Love, published in the fall of 2013, was a New York Times Notable Book Selection, a New York Times Editor's Choice, a 2013 Notable Fiction Choice from the Washington Post, and a Kirkus Reviews starred Best Book of 2013. And by the way, it's an amazing book. I just read it myself. Dubus has been a finalist for the National Book Award and has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, a National Magazine Award for Fiction, 2 Pushcart Prizes, and an American Academy of Arts and Letters Award in Literature. His books are published in over 25 languages, and he teaches full-time at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. He lives in Massachusetts with his wife, Fontaine, a modern dancer, and their 3 children. Welcome.
Lovely. Hello. Thank you so much, Julian. Thank you for inviting me. And Josh Prager, my new friend. I just made you that. I hope that's okay. You know, I'm really moved. I'm sitting here listening to wonderful Ed and Julie read, and I keep looking at this platform built over 100 years ago for human beings who are probably dead now to pose naked on. And I'm looking at the rafters and the way out of plumb friggin' studs and loving every bit of it. Preserving the past is important. And I think especially now as we're all staring at gadgets in our hands, it's very important to bring the ghosts into the room. So a round of applause for Josh Prager. Okay, I'm just going to read, not too long, maybe 18.3 minutes from this dirty book, Dirty Love. My mother-in-law is 93 almost, and she lives with us. She says, "Oh, Andre, the ladies at church want to know the name of your new book, but I'm embarrassed to tell them because it just sounds like so nasty." She said, "But it sounds like there's a lot of sex in it, so you probably sell a lot of books." I said, "Well, I have, Mary." Oh, God, is this film? Don't put that on. I'm just going to, so these are 4 very loosely linked novellas. And the second one is I'm going to read from. It's called Marla, and it's from the point of view of a woman in her 20s, a not so rare human being who's fallen through the cracks of love and has never had sexual relations, has not had a partner, and just when she thinks it's not going to happen for her, she finds a man and he finds her, and they begin to live together very quickly. And she's just very happy that she's the member of a couple for the first time. And she's not just Marla, she's part of Marla and Dennis. Her best friend is Nancy from the bank, where they're both bank tellers, and Nancy's husband is Carl. and I think that's all you need to know. Marla and Dennis are large people, and I think that's all you need to know. Dennis and Carl had hit it off so well that Nancy began arranging double dates for the four of them, 1 or 2 Saturdays a month. They go to a restaurant downtown, then maybe a movie or once dancing. At dinner, Dennis said he'd rather go to a movie instead, but Nancy wouldn't hear of it, and they drove over to the Marriott in Carl's Mercedes. The executive lounge was dimly lit and full of people, loud DJ rock blaring from gargantuan black speakers. Carl paid the cover charge, then led his wife between dancing couples right to the center of the crowded floor. Marla could see just the top of Nancy's head as she began to move fast to a song Marla had heard her whole life. She'd never really danced before, but the place was so loud and full and dark, nobody would really see her anyway. Why not? She pulled on Dennis's big hand, but he wasn't moving. He shook his head at her, then nodded at a small table a cocktail waitress was just finishing clearing. They sat down, and Dennis ordered a round of what they'd all been drinking at the restaurant. A new song began before the old one ended. The Rolling Stones this time. Marla knew most of their music from the radio. She leaned over the table to Dennis and shouted, "I want to dance." Dennis shook his head. "I don't dance." "Never?" He smiled and shook his head again, then sipped his Michelob. Marla sat back in her chair. The dance floor was too crowded to see Nancy or Carl, all those well-dressed bodies bobbing and jerking and swaying in the dim light. The music so loud she could feel the bass beat in her wine glass and under her fingertips on the table. Too loud for her and Dennis to even talk. She sipped her wine and watched the crowd. She could feel Nancy and Carl out there, and she didn't like it. Marla and Dennis should be there too, the same fun-loving couple who'd been laughing at Nancy and Carl's jokes all night, who'd been swapping stories from work, raising their glasses to toast the good times, Nancy and Carl smiling at them in the candlelight on the other side of the table, smiling at their fun friends, Marla and Dennis. Marla glanced over at him now. He was watching the DJ up on the small corner stage, studying the microphone and speakers, the electronics of his sound system, it seemed. Always an engineer. It was that part of Dennis that Carl seemed to admire so much, but without Carl treating him with such respect for his engineering skill, without Nancy smiling at both of them for having found each other, Marla sat there feeling a little lonely. But why should she feel this way sitting next to Dennis? She reached over and squeezed his hand. He smiled at her behind his beard, raised his beer to her in a toast. She toasted too, though she felt like an actor backstage rehearsing for the next scene, and she couldn't wait for the music to end and for Nancy and Carl to come back. At home, as one week pushed into another, little things about Dennis began to bother Marla. The sometimes nasal way he'd call her Marl. How at breakfast every morning he'd skip the newspaper headlines and do the crossword puzzle instead. How he cleaned up so often the place never looked lived in. Even their lovemaking needed something. It always seemed to stop just as things began to gather all warm and rising for her. And she didn't like how he always took a shower after. It made her feel dirty and like what they'd done was slightly wrong somehow. He stopped wanting to go anywhere except on weekends, preferred instead to watch TV or go to his computer room and play games where the viewer entered a cyber world armed with a shotgun, machete, and hand grenades. He taught her how to play it too. But sitting in that dark room, staring at the simulated colors of bad muscular men bleeding to death from just the click of the mouse on Dennis's desk, from the electronic blast of the shotgun or the swipe of the machete blade, Marla felt the same bruised emptiness that she did after an action movie, and she'd kiss Dennis on the forehead and leave the room while he kept playing. There was something else, too, and she hated herself for this, but it was his weight. Watching him walk naked into or out of the bathroom, she often looked away, not out of respect for his privacy, but because she honestly did not like to see the way his hairy chest pushed out to the side like a woman's. how his belly hung almost to his penis, which somehow looked boyish and outmatched in the great mass of all that flesh and hair. At first, she thought this reflected his size and strength, his very manliness. But that's when she'd allowed herself to think he'd been a wrestler or a weightlifter in college, maybe even a football player. Not the sedentary man she now knew him to be and to always have been. He told her that he spent his childhood in his room reading and drawing robots and guns and galactic cities floating in fiery orbits. That college was one long period of book after book and a lot of hamburgers, pizza, and fries. She found herself judging him for this, especially at night after dinner. Dessert, too, when he'd bring a box of crackers and a jar of peanut butter to the living room with him, or a second helping of dessert, or a hunk of cheese and bowl of nuts. One night in late November, a couple of days after a Thanksgiving they'd spent at a restaurant, she had a cold and sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, holding a hot cup of lemon tea. She glanced at the peanut butter crackers on his plate and said, "Are you really hungry?" He just sat down. He looked over at her, his cheeks flushed. Obviously. Marla didn't know if he was angry or embarrassed, and she felt mean-spirited and small. For a long minute or two, there was nothing but the sounds of the TV, the forced laughter of the studio audience, slender actors with good skin and shiny hair looking naturally appealing. "You shouldn't talk, you know." Dennis bit off half a cracker and chewed. "What?" "You know what I mean." Marla's face burned. It was as if he just overturned the couch and she was falling to the floor. "You're talking about my weight?" Dennis swallowed and bit into another cracker, his eyes on the television. There were crumbs in his beard, and she hated him for it, and they began to blur, and she jumped off the couch and rushed upstairs to their room. His room, really. His bed and his bureau and bedside table. On the walls were framed his degrees and another boring graphic. On the bureau were his wallet and keys. Where was her room? She curled up on the bed and cried. She could hear the jingle of a commercial downstairs, and she wondered how long he'd stay down there without coming up to address what had just happened between them. And what did happen? She was mean, and then so was he. But it was more than just that. Marla couldn't help but notice that part of her was relieved to see another ugly side of him. The TV noise stopped, and she heard the creak of the carpeted stairs, then the sinking of the bed, the smell of peanut butter and his perfumey cologne. "Marl?" "Yeah?" She sniffled, dabbed at her nose with 2 fingers. "You think I'm too heavy?" "Do you think I am?" "No." "Then why'd you say what you said?" "To get back at you, I guess." Marla sat up and blew her nose. He rested his hand on her thigh, and she knew they were on their way to patching this up, but something had opened between them, and she wasn't sure she wanted it closed. She looked straight ahead at the dark window. "I've always been fat, you know." "Me too." Marla wiped her nose. "But I bet you had girlfriends." 2 or 3, nobody special." "Well, I didn't." Marla kept her eyes on the black glass of the window, the reflection of the lampshade in it. "You're my first boyfriend." "I am?" "Yes." "Oh." He nodded his head slightly. She wished she hadn't told him, but was also glad she did, as if this were some kind of test they could not avoid, though she did not know who was testing whom. "Are you surprised?" "No." Yeah, of course I am. What's that have to do with anything?" Marla shrugged. "I'm not the best catch in the world, Dennis." Marla. "No, really. I'm not pretty. All I know how to do is count other people's money. Shh, stop that, Marla. You shouldn't say that." His voice was gentle but distant, too, like he was already beginning to believe what she was saying and didn't want to. He pulled his hand from her thigh and stared at the floor again. "You should never say that about yourself." They sat quietly for a moment. Then he stood and took a long, tired breath. "Want me to bring your tea up?" She shook her head and listened to him walk heavily out of the room and down the stairs. Later, in the middle of the night, She woke up with him pushing himself inside her, and he did it harder and faster than ever before. It hurt a little, but then felt good and lasted longer, too. He finally stopped and let out a moan, said into her ear, breathing hard, "I'm sorry, I was asleep." "Me too." He went to the bathroom first, and Marla lay there in the dark. She patted the bedside table for the box of tissues. They usually always use condoms. Dennis's seed swimming freely inside her. What if it found what it was heading for? She heard the shower turn on, the jerk of the curtain, Dennis washing himself off. That night she dreamed she was sitting in a rocking chair on a screened-in porch overlooking deep woods, sunlight coming through in brilliant patches. There was something warm and soft in her lap, a puppy, she thought. She looked down at it and saw a baby with fine black hair and a sweet, pinched face. The next day was Sunday, and on the way home from the matinee of a spy movie she hadn't wanted to see, she told Dennis her dream. She studied his profile as he drove, the way he nodded slightly, his eyes narrowed as if he were listening to the radio report of news in a distant country. She took a breath. "Think we'll ever have a baby, Denny?" "Not if I can help it." Marla felt slapped. She looked out the window at large houses, one with raked piles of leaves, a swing set in the yard. She felt like crying, not because of what he'd said, but how he'd said it, his voice adamant and final. Then his big hand was on her knee and she wanted to push it away. "You know I love you, Marl, but you know how much kids cost? How much attention they need? Nothing personal, hon. I just can't be bothered with that." "Bothered? You make it sound like one big nuisance." "Well, isn't it? Did your mother think so?" He smiled. "I know she did." Then he chuckled and began to reminisce about him and his brothers always destroying the house, chasing each other from room to room. He seemed to be done with the real conversation, but it had cleared a cold, dead path through her head. It was the first time he'd ever told her he loved her, but hearing him talk this way about what she had always viewed as the highest gift God could give, his paw resting too heavily on her thigh, the sickening smell of vanilla air freshener in his car, another Sunday afternoon wasted at a movie where men shot or impaled or blew up each other, she began to suspect she was nothing more than an easy addition to his life, one he could penetrate half asleep or go out with on the weekend, but that's it. No one to start a family with. Nothing like that. Her seatbelt was pushing into her hip, and she began to feel the possibility of an end ahead of them, the way the light of an August afternoon could sometimes cast the shadows of October. The week before Christmas, Dennis invited her to fly to Cleveland to spend the holidays with one of his brothers and his family. He asked her this before work as they were walking to their cars in the cleared driveway Dennis paid a man to plow. The air was cold in Marla's lungs and her breath was a thin cloud in front of her. "What do you say, Marl?" She opened her car door and glanced over at him standing at his Nissan, his tie loosely knotted beneath his overcoat, his beard glistening in the harsh sunlight. "I don't think so. I need to visit my parents. It's been a year." He nodded and looked only mildly disappointed, as if he were imagining the good times ahead of him anyway. "Well, think about it." He backed out of the driveway first and at the end of the street waved in his rearview mirror at her before he turned left and she turned right. And she didn't want to think about it. How could she be the woman he was going to bring home to his family? All the smiles and gifts and polite passings of gravy would feel like one big lie, which is what she was beginning to feel like, a liar. Somehow she was becoming the kind of woman she didn't like, somebody who felt one way but smiled it off in a mask of cheerfulness, the kind of woman who got very good at small talk. As she drove past all the identical ranch houses of their neighborhood, Marla's face still felt swollen from her cold. If it weren't for the Christmas rush, everybody in the world waiting in line to get their money, she'd call in sick and go back to bed. But again, it'd be his bed. Her comforter was on it, but that wasn't enough. She missed her old apartment. She missed the bathroom that only had her things in it. She missed Edna curling up with her on the sofa in her living room with her framed prints on the wall, and no illustrations of perfect parallel lines, no dustless bookshelves full of paperback spy novels, no pressure to keep things clean and just where they belong at all times, and not this lingering feeling that her life was really no better than it had been before when she was alone, an earlier unhappiness that now seemed preferable to this one. Thank you. Thank you. Will come up? We thought she'd sit here and we'd sit on each side.
Wonderful. So we all love answering questions, at least I do, and I'm presuming my friends do. This was a wonderful reading. Can we have another round of applause for Ed and Andre? And thank you. Very good. Thank you. So I thought that maybe just to get things started, I would ask the two of you a question. They've decided that I'm sitting in this throne in the middle,
Yes,
or the electric
You're the
chair.
queen.
I don't know if it's the place of execution or whether I'm the monarch, but with my courtiers. You know, on my way here today on the ferry, I was thinking about the three of us reading together. I mean, I'm very selfish, and I invited for this whole weekend not just writers I admire, but writers that I just personally like. So, but I hadn't thought about our work together at all, and something really struck me, and that is that, like me, the two of you very often write, and write very well from the point of view of the opposite gender. Now, fiction writers are in the business of imagining themselves into all kinds of other bodies and other souls, but I wondered whether the two of you might talk about the women in your fiction and the women in your lives, and just how is it that you come to write so beautifully and so confidently and so often from the point of view of women? Do you want to start, Andre?
Oh, gosh, okay. Well, I have a funny story. My wife, Fontaine, is sitting here, my beautiful wife of 25 years this June, by the way. She's a beautiful dancer and choreographer, and the first time I laid eyes on her, she was actually performing. And I was with someone else, and I knew I was going to marry her, and I did. Anyway. Well, she was the first one to read my novel, House of Sand and Fog, and one of the main characters is a woman. It's in the first person, and she said some nice things about the book, and she said, but honey, we don't call it rouge anymore. No, you know that red shit you put on your, what's that? That's blush. And then she gave me another correction. I don't know, I came across a gorgeous Eudora Welty line that I'm going to butcher horribly, but have you read it? It's a short paragraph, the preface to her collected stories. And it's something to this effect. She said, I've been accused of loving my characters. She said, but what I've always tried to do, no, she said, but that act of entering the private skin of another, be they black or white, man or woman, young or old, she said to me that is always the highest artistic leap possible. She said, it's the leap I hold most high. And I realized when I read it, I was actually moved to tears, and I only read it about a year ago. But that's the one I hold most high, too. And I do believe, whether a writer is gay or straight, male or female, within all of us, there is the knowledge of the other. I actually, I've been writing now 5-6 days a week for 30-something years, and in the deeper I get into the dream world, the scarier it gets, and the more comforting it gets, because I truly believe that at the bottom, there is no division between any of us. We are completely one. And so I think I think anyone who sits down and tries to imagine the life of another 2, 3, 4 hours every morning for decades will find something too that they didn't know was there. Anyway, I love trying.
I have the advantage of having always been an extremely girly man. And so it just felt natural to me. I think this is my first novel. And I didn't think about it, to be honest. I just, I liked these characters and I wanted to give them a voice, and it honestly was not something I gave it a bit of thought to. It's only after I wrote the book and people started asking me about it, I said, oh, I guess that isn't very well.
Go back to not thinking about it.
Okay. Well, now I can't stop thinking about it.
How about you and male characters, Julie?
Well, I actually, you know, people ask me that question all the time, and actually, sometimes I'm irritated by it, but I think part of the reason that I am is that I kind of, it is true that we all have hearts, we're all human beings. You know, there's no hard and fast membrane between different kinds of people, and you can categorize people in many different ways. But I do think that there are differences between the genders, and the choice to write often from the opposite gender is one that, you know, could be examined. And for me, I think that what I've come to realize is that in my most important characters, I'm often examining or just pulling out of myself some aspect of myself that I question, that I might even be ashamed of, that I just want to ruminate on.
And sometimes that's a man.
Well, actually, it could be a man, but I also think that when I take some intimate quality of myself and I put it into a character I've made up, if I put it into a character who is different in some cardinal way, I can hold it at arm's length. And that, I mean, I could be completely wrong about that because, you know, I always like to hear what readers say about what we do. You know how they say the customer is always right? I say the reader is always right. So if somebody tells me that there's a theme they see in a book, or, you know, I'd be curious to know why readers think I write so often from a male point of view. But I just, you know, I also know that Ed has some very, very colorful women in his life, and, you know, I thought you might tell some of your other stories, but that's okay.
Well, okay. Well, no, but that is true. I had the advantage of having a lot of very, very eccentric women in my extended family, and you know, my mother, my maternal grandmother was one of 14 farm children from a little town in Kentucky. That's sort of formed the basis for the fictional town in the novel, and most of I think 10 of the 14 kids were girls. And so I had a whole crew of great aunts, and they were all a little odd, and they made a big impression on me. You know, you know, of course, I have a really wonderful father, so it wasn't like I lacked a male role model, but these women were really fascinating to me, and I spent a lot of my youth listening to them and hanging out with them. And you know, the very first short story I ever wrote was a short story that was essentially about an experience I had with my great aunt, an aunt named Olitha, and she was just fascinated by funerals, and she would go just for entertainment to any funeral that was around, and I would sometimes accompany her to these funerals, and mostly she loved to critique them afterwards, and she would just. So I spent a lot of my youth sitting and listening to my great aunt, like, you know, go on. She would talk about, you know, the clothes on the body, and you know, and whether or not, you know, how many people cried or didn't, or the quality of the flowers. She just loved to nitpick these things, and she just grinned and she told you about it. She goes, "Oh, you should have seen what she was wearing," and it was wonderful. So I just, you know, I had all of these women in my head when I started writing it, and they. You know, they were going to come out one way or the other. So anyway, there's a million. I have told Julie a lot of these stories. Yes. It can go on, so I'm going to stop now.
Do we think that there's a job for like a funeral reviewer? I mean, people you know, if you go online now, people have opinions about everything. You know, maybe you need to start a blog or something like that. You know, you could rate them like the Amazon reader reviews with stars.
Yeah. Well, the first story I wrote, actually, I you know, exaggerated things quite a lot. And the old lady in the story gives them a rating from 1 to 5 crucifixes. And so, anyway.
There's a wonderful line from the writer Janet Burroway. She says, when readers go to the book, I always argue with people when they say they love to read because they love to escape. I say, well, what are you talking about? That's not escape. Escape is bourbon and poker. When you're reading literature, it's taking you deeper into life, deeper into its human truths and textures. Anyway, the writer Janet Burway has a great line. When she said, when we readers go to the book, what we're saying to the book is, give me me. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, you might be a black man reading from the point of view of a white girl, and you feel just as much more of your humanity than you did that day waking up. I find that to be so beautiful about people and art in general.
You know, Junot Diaz said something that I particularly like. He said, when you read one of my books, it's not that I want you to get into my book. I want my book to get into you. And I think that's a really beautiful way to express it.
You know, Tim O'Brien, the great Tim O'Brien, The Things They Carried, he's an acquaintance, and about 20 years ago with his novel In the Lake of the Woods, he was quickly getting into a cab. We were in a city, and he just quickly inscribed it before driving off, and he wrote, Andre, I hope this reaches inside. Tim, I'm running after the cab. Oh my God, that's all I'm trying to do, Tim, that's it. That's what art is all about. You just said it in 3 words. Right? Yeah. Just do something to me. And only one thing's ever going to reach inside, and that's truth. That's it.
I also, you know, I mean, I know you teach, and I teach not as much as you, but I teach intensive week-long fiction workshops, and one of the places that I teach, my favorite place to teach, is just down the hill. I'm not sure what I think that way, the Fine Arts Work Center. But people talk a lot about the rules of writing, and one of the things I like to do is to just kind of slam down all the myths, because the beauty of writing fiction is that you can do it however you want. And the reason that you don't have to get board certified or pass a bar like a surgeon or an architect is that you can't kill anybody if you're a fiction writer. You can make them waste $25.99 plus tax. You can waste a couple of their hours, but no building is going to fall on their head. You're not going to remove the wrong organ, unless you're a very powerful writer. But so people talk about also write what you know. And I like to say, you know, write what you want to know and then go find out. But I came across this really beautiful quote from Grace Paley, I'm pretty sure. And what she says is, we write about what we don't know about what we know. And if you really think about that, in other words, we take the things we know and we go deeper. What don't I know about the things I think I know? And when you do that successfully and the reader comes to the book, it's like they're falling down a rabbit hole, you know?
I want to ask another question, because I was nodding my head on the couch when Julie's describing no outline. The way you begin with the stories is very much how I've always done it, just free falling into the imagination with one word at a time and never an outline or a thought. Do you work the same way? Do you find?
No, I don't. I had a very good musical education, but I did not have a writing education. And so when so my writing education came from reading wonderful writers like you guys. And so for me, when I was looking for form, I thought about musical forms. And so which actually tend to be rather strict, and of classical music forms. And so to this day, with every single story, certainly with the novel, the Supremes, and then the new novel that I'm working on now, the first thing I did was sort of map it out like a symphony movement. Really? And because that makes sense to me. And that's, sort of, so I have to think I know what the themes are, how it is developed, and how it resolves.
What if the string section misses a bus?
Well,
Doesn't make it to practice on a particular day.
Well, then that's, then you change key.
And Grandma likes to join. No, but I'm serious, because for me the joy, and I'm sure for Julie too, I want to hear from you, but the terror and the daily joy, though, is again that line from Paley, is that discovery process, and oh. And I mean, I'm sure that your process allows for that in the same way that I would imagine playing a piece you know really well still allows for spontaneous micro moments.
Absolutely. It's purely because I need that structure. I don't feel I have to adhere to that structure. So it's
cool.
so I absolutely do not expect the things that I wrote, in that little form to remain the same. They won't, and often I prefer that they don't. But I need that at the very beginning.
Just so you can pick up the cello and the bow.
Yes.
Nice. You want to hear Faulkner's great line? You probably know it, but I love this because it has to do with what we're talking about. He was asked late in his life, what's the main thing a writer needs? He said, it's not talent. He said, I used to think it was talent, but it's not. He said, I think it's curiosity. And his exact phrase was, curiosity, insight, to wonder, to mull and to muse why it is that man does what he does. And if you have that, then talent makes no difference whether you've got it or not. And for me, just back to what you were saying too, Julie, is the stories that have gone best for me writing-wise have been ones where I found that I was stepping in with far more authentic curiosity. I find in writing classes what I really try to do is steer writers mainly to their authentic curiosity. What are you really interested about? Are you just writing that because you think you're going to sell more copies, or do you give a damn? You must be interested. I mean, to me, they're like children visiting their nascent mothers. A child's going to pick this woman and not this woman, and your story knocked on your shoulder, but not mine and not Ed's, and Ed's knocked on his, and I think it's almost sacred to follow it. I really do, and I think there's always something to find that's deeply surprising, and it's my religion. Only one I got.
Get the mic.
Stand up. Thank you very much. I could have listened to you all night. I didn't want any of you to stop reading. It was just wonderful. But I wonder who you read. Who do you can't wait for their new book to come out? Or maybe reread, or someone you really enjoy. Not necessarily inspire you, but just somebody you have to read that book. I'm curious. I just got back from 3 days in Hannibal, Missouri. I had never been there before, and I'm now rereading Mark Twain. I just can't believe how long it's been since I read him. But I wonder who has that for you.
Well, Julia Glass is going to, I'm going to say Julia, she's going to say Andre. You want to go first? I have too many. Want me to go?
I do too. No.
Go ahead. No, you. It's your turn.
Right. Ladies first.
Ladies first.
Not that I'm necessarily a lady, but I always mean to have with me at readings a list, because afterwards I'll go, darn, I didn't mention so-and-so. But so if you ask whose next book I can't wait to read, so I'll talk about contemporary writers, because there are certainly 19th century writers that I worship. And my writing, which is fairly convoluted, filled with subplots, filled with many points of view, is often compared to 19th century literature. And to me, that's a great compliment. But I find that I do read mostly contemporary work. And people whose next novel I cannot wait for include, besides these gentlemen, Margot Livesey is someone I really love. Peter Cameron is someone I really love. Michael Cunningham. I've got the new one, and I can't wait to read that one. Actually, there's a writer here who's going to be reading tomorrow from her new novel, which I just read. Valerie Martin is someone whose fiction I absolutely love. Valerie has a very twisted imagination. I think she may be here, but I can't see her in the dark. But beautiful, beautiful work. Richard Russo is someone I really love. Alice Munro. I guess she's stopped writing now, right?
I hope she's lying.
I hope she's lying, yeah. And you know what? I'm also discovering new writers all the time. And the past year has been one in which I've discovered writers whose next book I can't wait for. Among them, is Jess Walter. I just discovered him through Beautiful Ruins, and I actually have gone back.
Isn't that
Fortunately,
a great book?
Love that
Oh,
book.
I love that.
And then Financial Lives of the Poets. Is that hilarious?
It's on my stack.
Yeah. So he's somebody that, it's great when you discover somebody new and they actually have previous books that you can read before you wait for the next one to come out. I also read Maria Semple's book, Where'd You Go, Bernadette, which I loved. I read Want Not by Jonathan Miles, maybe.
Johnny Miles.
Do you know him?
Yeah,
I
from
think.
Mississippi.
And these are,
Really good.
and then Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk by Ben Fountain. And he's someone who has a first novel book before that I'm eager to go back to. I find actually what's interesting is that in this past year, I've really loved a lot of satiric fiction. And I don't usually love satire. And what's interesting about the satires that have been coming out, or the ones that I've really liked, including a few of those books, is that there's a really tender heart at the core.
There better be.
Yeah, I mean, if there's no, like Billy Lynn as a character, what an amazing character, and yet what a sharp and fairly damning portrait of our country at this moment, and in an era of fractured military confrontations. So,
She reads a lot of books, this one. I watched The Wire. That was, I'm kidding.
Oh, there's TV too.
I do read a lot, but one of the interesting surprises of the last few years of my life is I get a lot of galleys to read from first-time writers, and I find that I spend most of my reading year reading first books, because I can't say no. People helped me when I was starting, and I can't not read them. But I'm reading some wonderful first books. Michael Cunningham has written one of my favorite novels. The Hours is one of the most beautiful works of art I've ever read. It is one of my favorite novels. I love Ian McEwan. Just love the British novelist Ian McEwan. I love E.L. Doctorow. And Alice Munro, they should name a planet after. But I should confess that I read probably as much poetry as I do fiction. I read 6 to 10 poems a day. And so there are poets whose books I'm always looking for, like Stephen Dunn. I always want his new collection. Sharon Olds, Marie Howe. I mean, I'm a huge devourer of poetry. And the truth is, I find that I'm fed just as much by music as I am by literature. And I want to hear about you and your cello, man. I want to hear, where is it? Did anyone bring a cello? Because I'd like to hear Ed play. Don't you want to hear him play?
Yes!
I hear his beautiful voice and his writing, and I want to hear the man play his other instrument.
About who I read, it's the same thing. I think I should write a list. But I really loved Matt Johnson's Pym. I thought that was really wonderful. Pym. It's a wonderful book. So I'm really excited about what he does next. I love Toni Morrison, and there's a short list of writers who I run to get the whatever's new from them, and you're asking about books that you return to. I must have read Sula, oh gosh, a dozen times by now. I just think it's perfect, and I love to read it, and. See, this is where I get stuck. I think, oh, okay, there were all those books. Oh, I liked a bunch of them.
But can I tell a funny story about Norman Mailer, who, this was his town for so long, as you all know?
He was in this barn?
I bet he was. I bet
he was naked on this platform.
I'm sure he was. Mailer was interviewed, now I'm really dating myself, but Mailer was interviewed by Dick Cavett. I'm watching the Dick Cavett show, and he's asking Mailer, have you read the new... Vidal Gore, not Vidal Gore. Gore Vidal. Gore Vidal. He said, no, I haven't. Well, what do you think of the new Doctor? I haven't read it. Well, what about Mishra's new book? I haven't read it. Mr. Mailer, I don't want to embarrass you on national television, but do you read fiction? So, honestly, when I'm writing a novel, I don't read other people's novels. I read nonfiction. He said, you're kidding. He said, let me tell you, when I'm writing a novel, he said, I feel like I'm in my garage, surrounded by 1,500 oily car parts. And I read a beautiful novel by one of my contemporaries. It's like looking out the bay and watching a beautiful red sports car go by, and they're waving. And I just feel demoralized and can't continue. He said, so I just don't read damn books when I'm writing. I love that. I thought, and I was so encouraging as a young writer. I mean, I find, most of us get inspired by reading, but I just thought that was great.
You probably get asked this a lot, but I'm wondering how you came to writing short stories and novels after being with music so long, or were you always doing it and you didn't come out into the public until
Well, there's a
later?
story that goes. I wanted to write since I was a kid, and I was one of those people who would start things and never finish them. So I have I have in the basement of my house one of those giant Tupperware tubs full of stories that I started and never finished. And I've been collecting them for like 25 years. And I would always say, oh, I'll come back to this story later. But then something would come up, you know, I would have to play a concert, or a student would need something, or there was always some excuse for not finishing it. And so I would, for years and decades, I would start things and not finish them. And when I turned 40, I said, okay, this has to stop. I really want to write, and I don't want it to just be bullshit. You know, I want to actually do it. And I am not a person, just, you know, who, among my friends, you know, if you come to me and you tell me, I really want this, I really want that, and then you do nothing to do it, to accomplish it, I'm not the person you bring that to, because I will belittle you. So and when I found myself doing that, you know, for 25 years, I thought, yeah, maybe I should stop that. So anyway, so when I turned 40, I thought, okay, I'm going to finish something. So what happened for me was the Chicago Public Radio had this contest for their radio show, Stories on Stage. And I thought, okay, I'll enter this contest. This will be my goal. I'll enter this contest. I'll finally finish something. And so I wrote this, or began a story about going to the funerals with my great aunt. And the deadline came, and the story ended up in the Tupperware. But about 3 months later, I get a call to play a gig. And I don't know if any of you know any freelance musicians. What happens usually, you don't know what you're playing or who you're playing for. They tell you what to wear and when to get there. So I, you know, show up in my tux, and I discover that I've been hired by Chicago Public Radio to play for an evening honoring the people who won the short story contest. And I thought, you know, so, you know, I sit there playing, you know, Mozart quartets for 2.5 hours and just thinking, ugh. And so I thought, okay. But so I thought, okay, well, this is a sign. I thought, it wasn't even, you know, again, it wasn't that I thought I would have won that contest. It was just that I didn't finish it, you know. So a year later, I wait a full year to do anything about this, of course. You know, so a year later, the contest comes around, and I finish the story. And I'm just so proud of myself. And I honestly, you know, I've told this to people many times, of a lot of lovely things have happened since this novel, but honestly, the proudest moment of my writing career was walking from my house to the mailbox with that finished story. Honestly, I remember every second of that walk. And I was just overjoyed. I was so thrilled at that moment. And that, you know, I ended up winning the contest with that story. And then some nice little things started happening after that. And although I didn't, you know, get another thing published for like 2 years, but I kept writing, and I was, and then a decade later, I wrote The Supremes Are All You Can Eat, and with some help from some lovely, lovely people, I was able to, you know, get that published, and so that was how it happened for me.
Great story.
So first, a little comment. Norman Mailer did actually rent this place for 2 years, and Peter Manso, a man wrote a book about Provincetown, and the phrase that even senility will not be able to take from my brain about the parties Mailer threw in this barn is, quote, the clumps of writhing bodies. So it was a little more naked, a little less dead. But I have a question. Has technology, just the endless wave of technology, affected in any way the way that you write or read?
Good question. You and I were talking briefly about technology before. We both have a flip-open phone. I say this with no judgment for anyone in this room, because I brought crack into my house and everybody's addicted. I'm never going to get an iPhone. I just never want to stare at a screen in my hand. I walk into rooms, and you do too, and 20 out of 25 adults and kids are looking at screens in their hands. I feel like I'm walking into a room and everybody's stoned, and I'm not. So I've never texted our 3 kids. I'm never going to text anybody. Anyway, my point is, so I'm a bit of a Luddite. I write longhand with black wing 602 pencils. I sharpen with the blade. I write in me composition notebooks. because it makes me go slowly. And the thing about writing the computer, there's nothing wrong with it. Every writer I know does. But for me, it looks pretty damn good when it may not be. You know, and when it looks like crap, but then starts to read fairly well and still be physically unattractive, it can be good. The thing for me, though, with technology, and I'll turn it over to my writer friends, is I can be a Luddite in my personal life, but I better pay attention to what's going on. Because there's no way I can be a novelist in 2014 without paying attention to what technology is doing to us, because it's just, as we all know, social change is catastrophic. I think a lot of it's not good, but you know, there's some good. There was the Arab Spring. There are some things like TED Talks. They're good things. I'm just trying to find them slowly without looking for them.
Well, you know, I'm pretty much in the same camp you are. I have a flip phone too. And
You go, girl!
but it does mean that it's very hard to communicate with my teenage son who only texts.
Yeah.
So he gets all these like, it's mom, call me back, you know. So there's definite disadvantages to the Luddite outlook on life, and every single new thing I've been dragged into kicking and screaming, usually by an editor or my agent. My agent is the one who forced me to get a cell phone. I think it was my third book tour. She said, honey, nobody can reach you. And I thought, well,
That's the
so
point.
if it were 20 years ago, but it's not 20 years ago. I also love the people who, when I didn't have a cell phone, told me that I was an irresponsible mother for not having a cell phone. I mean, I mostly work at home. Their dad had a cell phone. He has a flip phone too still. So, but there is this push me, pull you of needing to be a member of the community and also needing to sell books, and the way that goes is, but you know, email is something that I embraced as a replacement for writing letters, which I used to do avidly. So my friends get these long emails from me, and then and I wonder why they answer me so brusquely, and it says sent from my iPhone, and I realize everybody's reading everything on those screens. So,
And they're typing to you while driving down the highway at 74 miles an hour.
you know, but I have also been somewhat seduced, and email is a great distraction for me, because I'm always looking at the little thing down there in the bar, like, and it goes ping if somebody comes in. And you know, the writer Margot Livesey, who funny, the writer Margot Livesey, who I mentioned earlier and admire,
She's a
a few
beautiful
years
writer.
ago
Beautiful writer.
said that she became so distracted by email that she got a separate computer. Now she has an apartment where she can have a separate room that the computer that is connected to the universe and the cloud or whatever is in its own room. The room in which she writes has a computer that can't access that. It's just essentially a typewriter, because she found that she could not stop looking at her email. And also I have to say, you know, I want to mention that it's a coincidence that in my novel, And the Dark Sacred Night, there is a cellist. That character goes all the way back to 3 Junes, from which, you know, some of the characters came back in this novel. And here I was now creating the full story of this cellist who'd been a very minor character in 3 Junes. And I thought, oh my God, I just met Ed. I know a cellist. So Ed got these ridiculous, stupid questions by email from me about the care and maintenance of cellos, about cello music, and if you were at a music camp, you know, what would they be playing? And, you know, give me a piece of music that the cello player and the flute player might fall in love with each other. So he just wrote me these. I learned so much. I mean, a lot of this hit the cutting room floor, but the funniest thing about this was that, of course, at first I thought I'd go and buy all these pieces of music that he told me, because I'm very old-fashioned. And then someone said, no, you just go to YouTube. So I would go to YouTube and put in, say, you know, Carnival of the Animals or something. I wanted to hear, you know, Voliere. And immediately all these things would come up. And I'd like click on the first thing, and there'd be this kind of wobbly image, and some little boy would march into the screen and sort of stand there and kind of, and I think, no, this is no good. And then I would look down and it would say, you know, Sean's 6th grade recital. And I go, no. So I'd go back and I'd click on it again. And then I'd see, you know, this church full of people, and it's somebody's wedding, and somebody's playing there, and it's an ad, you know, hire me to play flute at your wedding. Do you know that I had spent, I mean, I don't go religiously on YouTube, but I didn't realize until I'd done this with about 5 pieces of music that you sent me, that there's this way you can see how many people have viewed it, and that can tell you. So you don't go to look at the Carnival of Animals when only 14 people have viewed it. You go for the
Aunt Josephine, Uncle Harry.
400,000, and then that's how you find the Philharmonic playing it or something. But man, I wasted so many hours looking at children's music recitals. I'm sorry, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I begin everything longhand. And I don't feel I have a connection emotionally with the keyboard. But at the same time, I have an iPhone. I love my iPhone. And I use it for all sorts of things. I don't use it to interact with the world, but I use it to find out stuff. And that aspect of it I love. And I love to be able to stop at the corner and say, okay, where can I get the biggest drink the fastest? And that kind of stuff is.
Is that a special app?
Yeah.
Big drink app?
I created it, thank you.
You'd make a fortune if you did.
But stuff like that I love it for. But writing, that part of my life is absolutely very, very old-fashioned. The computer is a typewriter for me.
Yeah. I confess that I do write on the keyboard now, and it feels...
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's working good for you.
Fine, it is working. Although, the writer Sue Miller, I did an event with her, and people asked us, now this was back in 2003, so people asked us that question, do you write longhand or do you write, on a computer? And, some people think that's a stupid question, and I don't think it is, because you get answers like ours, but she said something interesting. She said she used to write on the computer, but she went back to writing longhand because she was teaching at MIT. They were doing a study, not that she was involved in, but she encountered the study, where they were looking at the difference between people who craft their writing on a keyboard and people who craft by longhand. And she said, I'll just name 2 of the findings that disturbed me about people who write on keyboards. 1, you write longer sentences than you would if you were writing longhand. 2, you deploy a larger vocabulary than you would writing longhand. Now, so I said, well, does that bother you? And she said, well, what bothers me is that anything about the technology would change my writing in any way. I want the writing to come, just organically from me. And so she said, then I went back to crafting in longhand and then, transcribing it. And I thought that was interesting.
She has a beautiful Sue Miller does line about the description of writing a novel.
Love this
She said writing a novel is like darning an argyle sock the size of a football field. Or knitting an argyle sock the size of a football field.
That is so beautiful. We want to be sure that there's time for people to buy books, which Nan lugged up that path, and to have us sign them. So maybe we could have one more question, and then we'd love you to stay, and we will get out our pens, and in longhand we will sign the books that you buy. Was there one more question?
Yeah, one more question.
Brenda.
I wanted to pick up on something Andre said and also kind of twist your question a little bit. Instead of telling us who you read, who reads you first? What do you look for in a first reader? Who do you trust? What do you get out of it? And I'm imagining it's not the person who's going to say, oh, it's great, it's perfect. So I'd just like to hear a little bit about that.
I'll start with that because I came to writing after painting. I majored in art in college. Through my 20s, I was a painter, but I made my living with my word skills and finally realized in my 30s, because I was reading fiction, writing nonfiction, but maybe what I really wanted to do was to write fiction. Now, I could have gone back to school, say, to an MFA program, and in some ways it's sort of mysterious why I didn't, because I was always a good student, but I didn't. I didn't do that. I didn't enroll in workshops. I just started to write stories. And after a time, I started to submit them. And maybe it took me longer to get published than it would have had I gone through a more conventional schooling where I could have mentors and a network. But to make a long story short, it was 14 years from the time I started writing till 3 Junes came out. And during that time, the editors who took my stories read them, published them, but I had no readers. I had no sort of network. And I like to say I sort of wrote in a cave. So 3 Junes was like this daydream life that I had. And when an agent took it and read it and began to talk to me about it, it felt as if there'd been a prison break. Like, how did she know my characters? Like, they just sort of, well, you don't know those people, they belong to me. And then my editor. And so this amazing thing happened where suddenly more and more strangers read. I remember the first email from a bookseller reading The Galley, and it was just this, and then my first reading with strangers who had read the book, and it was just such a high for me. So then when I was working on my second novel, and also I got to meet writers I admire, and people began to offer to read for me, as it were.
Well, her first novel also won the National Book Award, which is kind of unprecedented.
Yeah, not quite, but
Yeah, but pretty damn
almost,
close.
I think Philip Roth.
Yeah.
So anyway, I could have changed my ways, but like you said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And when I said to my editor, maybe I should start showing my work at earlier stages, she said, that's up to you, but you did very well the first time around without that. So what happens for me is I really get a pretty full draft out, and 3 people read it at once. My agent, my editor, both of whom have been with me from the very first book, and that's unusual to be 5 books in, same posse, and Dennis, my partner, reads it. And I used to let him read earlier, but this thing would happen where he'd say, oh, this character Tony, that's our friend Tom, right? I'd say, no, it's not. And then I'd go back to working on the book, and all I could think of was our friend Tom. So he got punished. He reads it when they read it. So how about for you?
I have always, I didn't take the MFA route. I wrote for about 10 years, then I went to an MFA program and dropped out. And because what I love about writing is the solitude. I'm a fairly public, I go to a party, I never want to go to a party. My wife brings me, I never want to go. I'm the last to leave, and I'm working it like I'm running for friggin' office. But man, I like my solitude, and I like it for 10 hours at a time if I can get it. I don't write for 10 hours, but I love the solitude of writing. So it takes me 3 to 5 years to write a book, and I never share a word with anyone, ever. And I work actually in a cave, in a soundproof room in my basement. It's 5 feet wide, 6-foot ceiling, 11 feet long, little port window I cover with a black blanket. I stare at a blank wall, and I put on headphones for total silence, and I just stay there. And 4 or 5 years later, I give it to my wife. She's my first reader, and it is a terrible experience because that's 4 or 5 years of your life. And I remember the novel that put me on the map and made me an 18-year overnight success. I was writing for 18 years before that book came out. My first book went to 39 publishers, and my second went to 29 publishers, my third went to 24 publishers. And then it took off. So I give it to my wife. I kind of lock her in the bedroom for 18 hours, take care of the kids, bring her sandwiches. Don't get out, get back in there. You need toilet paper, here it is. Shut the door. And it's like 3 in the morning, a day and a half later, and I'm sitting in the kitchen, and if I smoked, I'd be chain smoking. I'm just sitting there, Jesus Christ. And she comes down, she's a beautiful woman, but she looked like she'd been through hell, man. And she comes in, and her first words to me after, she'd read this book and working for 4 hours in total solitude was, how could you? What? It's so sad. I know it's sad. But, and then off we went. But so to this day, it's been her for almost, 26 years, and then it's my agent. And then, honestly, I'm one of these writers who does not want to know what anyone thinks about a damn thing I've written. I don't go to Google. I've never gone to Google. Once by accident, I had to go to my website to look at my tour page to see where the hell I was that week, and I began to see reviews, and I just had to quickly plow past it. Because I have to protect myself from this stuff. The writer Richard Bausch had a beautiful line. He said, if you think that you're thinking when you're writing, think again. You're much closer to the dreaming side of your mind. So dream it through. So I find I do all sorts of weird things to protect my dream world, including trying to ignore the career part of it, even though I'm grateful for it. I try to protect myself from it and stay in that cave all the time.
It's amazing.
My partner, Peter, is the first person who reads anything that I write. And though I will confess, the first time I showed him anything, it was for a pat on the back. I did not receive that pat on the back, which is very helpful. That's why he still is the person who reads it all, because he actually will tell me what he thinks, and it's very helpful. But yeah, but that's the only person until Barney, to my agent.
Wow. Well, thank you very
Thank
much,
you all.
everybody.
Fun.